All right, coming up, it is another mailbag edition of the Locked On Nets podcast where we get into the biggest topic, it feels like right now, on Brooklyn Nets fans' minds, the center position. Will Nic Claxton be brought back on a new contract? Can he step up and take on a larger role for this team? What about the trade component Andre Drummond and that big body of his, let alone to say nothing of one little man from G League stardom to budding NBA prospect in Day'Ron Sharpe? We're going to break down all the angles of how the Nets move forward as a stronger team right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Go on another edition of the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Marmbrick, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms, and let you know today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Check out prizepicks.com and use promo code NBA, or go to your app store and download the app today. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. And Doug, as we said at the top, the only thing left to do is break down the most intriguing position, not only of this season, but maybe of the Brooklyn Nets franchise over the past decade, the center.
Oh, man. Yeah. I mean, of all the mailbag questions we got on this one, and we got a ton, thank you so much. And go back and listen to part one of the mailbags. We covered a lot of stuff. I would say in terms of volume, the most questions we got was just related to the center position. So thanks. I know there was more than this. Clash Bandicoot had a question about it. Stacey Walker had a question about it. Duncan Lur Bonzi, I hope I said that right, had a question about it over on Twitter. And then Billy Burger Bailey as well. So a lot of different questions. Not all questions about it were about the same guy, but they were all about the center position. So I think, and you're right, this has been the question around the last couple of years or at least among Nets fans, is that what to do around the center position. And sometimes you think you have the answer, and then that answer doesn't end up being it, or the answer is different for different times of the season. I think we've seen and know that, center means a lot different on day one of an NBA season as opposed to day 120 when you're in the playoffs, or game 100. You don't get that many. Game 100 if you make it all the way to the playoffs and make it far. So we'll try to cover it today, but for sure this has been one of the most pressing questions because it's been something the Nets haven't totally figured out over the last couple of years. Even if you look at this, the KD run, the last couple of years, they just have not found a good, viable, consistent player to fill this need for like long stretches of time and into the playoffs. So yeah, we'll try to break it down, but this is definitely, there's a lot to this one.
No, 100%. And I think it's funny because you and I talked about it. We're going to get to Andre Drummond in a minute. When you make the trade with Harden and you bring in these pieces, you think you're adding something to this mix, but there's been a slew of names. There's been a lot of veteran guys that have been brought around this, but oddly enough, or I guess most impressively should be to say, Nic Claxton remains, I think, the most important component of the center position this offseason. When you think about what he showed after another difficult start to the season, wasn't available, injuries, illness, etc., finally starts to round himself into form, and then maybe gives us and fans like the exact wrong sample in the playoffs, though it's not what I'm hanging my hat on, but missing a ton of free throws as you get swept out of a series, and you don't seem to be able to have the ability to make an impact in a big game against a really difficult opponent, maybe changes the perspective on how valuable this player should be, or how much the Nets should be willing to invest in him in the offseason.
Yeah, I think this is the big question. I don't think it's a matter of whether or not you want Nic Claxton on your team. I think that the Nets would happily, for the right number, would happily re-sign him, right? Like, I think he showed enough in this past year that there is a lot to kind of like, you can still hang your hat on with Claxton, right? I don't think we've fully realized what the potential is yet. Some of that is by circumstance. There's been some injury in there. He's had a weird couple seasons about like, it's been hard for him to get on and stay on the court.
Of course.
I think in some ways this is going to help the Nets in terms of money because other teams are going to see this the same way. And it's going to be odd to offer him like an offer sheet. Like, I don't know what his market's going to be. Center is already a position that's pretty easy to fill with just bodies, right? And so he's not right now like an elite closing center, like on a championship team, though you can envision a world where he could stay on the court. So, but I do think, just before we get to Claxton as a person, like as a player, I think the Nets, he's heading into free agency here, and the Nets can match any offer. I think that they're praying that the market will not be all that robust for him, so that they can offer like essentially whatever the minimum. What was the minimum they could offer him?
Yeah, it come out 2.2 million would
Okay.
be the baseline offer sheet that they could put out there for him.
Right. I think they're probably praying against, hoping against hope that is what they can just get away with paying him. Right. Like, that'd be a nice number. You get another year of development, and you see if it can work together, because he's got some great traits for sure. You have not seen enough of a sample size yet. He doesn't have enough of his game yet. We just went off. Like you mentioned, the free throws were a complete and utter disaster in the playoffs. Like, they did not cost him the series. But I'll tell you right now, if this series had gone 7 games, let's say, and he had shot like this, you'd have questions about whether the Nic Claxton cost you the series. So, like, it didn't end up mattering because they had so many other problems. But, like, what do you think? Like, I think we agree that we want him back, right? Like, I think that seems like an easy answer, but there seems like it's more layered than that.
Yeah, I think the first part is, remember, like, he's 23 years old, so he's still incredibly young. And in some regards, because of the way the timeline so rapidly shifted for Brooklyn once they brought in Kyrie and got Kevin Durant and started thinking championship, this is a kid that managed to still keep himself in the picture, where for a lot of other guys we've seen the last couple of years may not have been able to hang around. But how young he was is what made him so attractive, I think, for the Nets. From a pure player standpoint, I think that there's a world where you have to stop. I know we're talking centers, but you might have to stop thinking about him as a center, because his defensive versatility affords you to say, and the fact that he runs the floor really well. Like, I would look at him as like a non-shooting 4. And I know, like, positionless basketball, but I would not sit here and say you can hang your hat on him being your first option at the 5, unless he's going to develop other areas of his game. Do I think he can? Yes. Because you say 3 years into it, but you talk about the total number of games he's played, he's still incredibly young by NBA standards from age and reps. The interesting factor to me is I want him back. I love him. We know that. We talked highly about him. I'll be curious to see. You mentioned how big is the market going to be? Because of how young he is, I wonder if non-playoff teams, some of the weaker teams around the NBA that have money to spend, might look at him and say, boy, you put out an offer sheet and maybe something a little bit over market value that'd be really hard for the Nets to match. We could end up getting a guy that we have for 4 years and turn around at 26, 27 years old, and he's just about to hit his prime.
Yeah. And there's things you can really dream on, right? Like, the defense is excellent. He was defensively, he easily hung in that Boston series. Like, there's no doubt about it, right? Like, he was great switching. He had a bunch of great plays, some true weak side blocks, a couple of just straight up blocks at the time. Like, we already know that his switchability is pretty above average, if not good, very good, especially onto guards when he's been asked to do that. So I think all that stuff is for sure there. That's an interesting point you make around how other younger teams might view him, because he might be a lot more along their timeline, especially if they see him as a work in progress. Because remember, this guy's only played 94 total games, and not that many minutes. Like, he's been in the league 3 years, but he has not played that much. I know that it's hard to remember that now because we just got off of a end of season where he kind of played a lot and he was really important for their team down the stretch. But we've been wondering about him for a long time. It's been some injuries. He had the weird sickness where he was out forever. And, it's just a situation where I think they just still don't know. And if another team sees him that way, that could become problematic, because there is going to be a number where they're going to decline to do it. I don't know what exactly the number is, but they're definitely almost for sure is a number, because I don't think they can view Nic Claxton as a guy that you can like break the bank on. And there's a very real scenario here. They're not the same player, so take this with the way it's intended. There's a very real scenario where we have like another Jared Allen 2.0 down like 2 years from now, where I don't think he's going to be like an all-star, but I don't know. People saw Jared Allen as an all-star, right? Like 2 years ago. And there is a world where he goes to another team. He just gets to play more. He stays healthy for a season. It's more consistent. He kind of unlocks some of the stuff we saw in college too. Like he can ball handle, like you said, he can run the court. There is a world, I think, where the upside could look bad if they didn't do it. And that's like the other reason you're like, maybe we go a little over. I don't know. This one's tough. We want him back, right? And I think I can see something happening here where they talk themselves out of it. Like, oh, it's hard to pair him with Simmons because now you got two non-shooting, like sort of rolling bigs, right? Like you can talk yourself out of it for a million reasons also with this Nets roster. So it makes it so tricky.
Well, and that's probably the other, because I was going to say, like, the things that you want to see him take a little, even a moderate next step on. I'm going to leave the scoring, right, the shooting touch. Although he started to show a little sample of that late in the season of, he's getting a little more confidence in the mid range, flipping up a couple of looks, right? So like those, it's your point.
Real quick, he shot 85% from the field in that Boston series. Like he was like 0% from the foul line, so that cut into that.
That's how you even it out. That's how you even things out.
Into the true shooting for the series. But yeah, he shot 80. I think I round up. Am I right here? 85. Sorry. Yeah, no, 85. Yeah, it doesn't matter. 85% from the field for the series on 6 shots a game. Not a lot, but like he made everything that he got his hands on in that series.
And you mentioned Ben Simmons, and this is what I think comes down to, because we'll start to move on to the other guys here. But I think for Nic Claxton, so and I remember the Nets could offer him all the way. It's like a 3-year, $45 million, 15 per, like that. That's like the the market value that he could command and what the Nets could give him immediately. Like, is a team going to give him an offer sheet that high? Probably not. I think some team will put an offer sheet out there, and I think that the Brooklyn Nets will match it because he continues to give you enough of this sample size. And if he shows some of the ball handling skills that he had as a prospect coming out that seem to go away or just haven't fully come along yet, to your point, it's like the Ben Simmons role. Well, if you can be a guy that can pass the ball effectively out of the 5, something he showed a little bit more. The 2-man game with Kevin Durant really started to come on down the backstretch of the season. So there's all these little samples that we thought we were going to see at the start of the year. It took all the way until the end in true Nic Claxton fashion. But if he can grow on that and that gets a little more consistent, then I think you have this little extra value to him, this little extra layer. And then even if you do have Ben Simmons on this roster, well, Nic Claxton is still this guy that you look at for 25, 30 minutes a game that rotates through and continues to fill almost like a like-for-like function. And that can be good for the Brooklyn Nets. You just have to maybe, again, reframe this idea of, well, he needs to bulk up and put on weight and become something else. That I don't think it's ever going to be him, right? And some people have still talked about that. I think you have to lose your thinking on that and put him more in the Ben Simmons model of what he can do for you out of that position, as opposed to being a more physical presence.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't think we'd want to see him bulk too much up. Like he's gotten stronger in his first couple of years for sure. Like we said, that we saw his finishing around the basket got stronger. His strength in general, like he was able to hold up against some bigger bodies at times. So yeah, this one's going to be interesting. I could see a world where, like you said, and then we'll finish it off and move on to Drummond here. But like I could see a world where, yeah, like another team kind of swoops in and talks themselves into it because they have a little, money to spend, and it's just going to be more than they know the Nets can offer.
What's the number? What do you think?
I'm always bad at this. I don't even want to. I'm just gonna admit that I'm bad at it.
Would you pay Claxton if you're the Brooklyn Nets? Would you pay him $14 million a year?
Well, no.
Okay. So, but you know what I mean. But that's because there's a world I think on the market someone's going to offer him around $12 million a year.
Really? I don't think so. We can take a bet. We can take an off-air bet on that one. I think that's not going to be the case. All right. Someone place you can put some little scratch in is over on Prize Picks. NBA fans, you're looking for a daily fantasy option for the NBA. You need to try the award-winning app Prize Picks. It's daily fantasy made easy. We love it. We know you will too. Prize Picks is so easy. This is why people gravitate to Prize Picks over some of these other daily fantasy operators. They just simplified it. You are just picking over-unders on 2 to 5 players. You're going in their projections. If it's NBA, the old faithfuls, points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks. You can do it for baseball too. You want to do home runs, strikeouts. They have it all there. Cool thing about Prize Picks too is you can combine those sports together. So I said 2 to 5 players. Didn't say just 2 to 5 players per sport. Now you throw in basketball, baseball, football when that's back around. It's all there on Prize Picks. They have safe and fast withdrawals. That's super easy. Not always 100%. You're going to get that from every operator out there now. And like I said, basketball, they have NFL, MLB, soccer, MMA, and of course, your favorite NBA for a limited time. Prize Picks is an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all of our users. You can get $50 for free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point. That's pretty easy. You have to use the promo code NBA. It's an exclusive offer for Locked On fans. Sign up today and use code NBA. $50 for free if a player in your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy.
And once you're done winning over there on Prize Picks, why don't you go ahead and start winning in your nutritional life by getting your hands on a Built Bar? We just got, I think Doug did, I know I received my box in the mail of the birthday cake puffs. That's the 100% coated in real chocolate, protein infused marshmallow puff bars. Listen, we talk about it all the time. Great tasting and also good for you. Those are the two things you're looking for. You don't want to have any of those drawbacks of candy bars. You don't want to be putting empty calories into your body. That's why, with just 150 calories, 16 grams of protein, and only 9 grams of sugar, in this limited time flavor, it's an amazing option for you to be looking healthy and getting a great flavor variety in your day. You go over to built.com right now and use promo code LOCKED15, and you're going to get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off on built.com of the limited birthday cake puffs. Okay, so we're going to get to Drummond here in a second, but I will just quickly say, I catching myself when I started throwing out money and being like, yeah, 14 million for Nic Claxton. I think I can see the value of a player like that, and I can envision him in other teams in a role where you're like, oh yeah, like that could really help a young team develop over the next handful of years, et cetera. And if they have the money, the dollars don't necessarily look the same as it does for Brooklyn, but we've also seen where when the market isn't quite as robust for one of these players, the Nets can end up retaining them on a more team-friendly deal while still offering him something where it says it's not going to be 2.2 million for you, but we're not going to worry about breaking the bank.
Yeah, look, they went through this with Bruce Brown last year. It was like, and he didn't get it, but it was like had no idea. Like no one had any idea what his market was going to be. And there was numbers that went up to like, someone going to pay $9 million for Bruce Brown, right? They didn't do it. He came back for 4.7. But the point being that these numbers, it's just very hard to know. And I think that's like mostly what it is. It's like very hard to know specifically around these weird kind of guys, right? Like these guys that look good for your team, but it's hard to maybe envision them looking great for another team. I think Claxton's a little different than Brown in that way. I think it's a little easier to see like where that lands. I think you can vision it a little easier.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can get on the Drummond, but I think that kind of like speaks to the point of sometimes these numbers are really hard to get because you just don't know what these other teams view. And frankly, Drummond's the same case here. Like it's not different.
I was going to say, so, Drummond, obviously, when they make the trade with Harden in Philadelphia, Drummond, he's not a throw-in player. I think he was put into it specifically to try to help the Nets over the course of the remainder of the season to say, we know we need another big body here. LaMarcus Aldridge not really involved, right? They're getting away from some of the other players that they had utilized. You and I talked about at the time. This one is really curious to me because fans seem to have a different opinion of what was coming in than you and I. You and I said, he's a big body. He's going to rebound. And that's essentially what you're getting. Like, this is not plug and play. Here's your starting five. Everybody get out of his way. And that pretty much bore itself out. And also, because we know the Nets have the advantage of being able to spend money on players that they're retaining as opposed to go and pursue ones on the market. This is a curious one to me because you can look at free agents and they're only going to be more expensive, the guys that are going to be on the market. So, I mean, where do you stand on him? Because my initial reaction was, yeah, he should be gone because I just don't think that he's a needle mover. But I caught myself doing the DeAndre Jordan. Well, you do need inning eaters here over the course of an 82-game season. Okay, so this is the curious case of Andre Drummond, right? Because this is the same sort of thing, right? It's not dissimilar from the Claxton problem, even though they're very different players. On the one hand, I think you could really benefit from having an Andre Drummond on the team for the whole season, right up until the part where the playoffs start. Like, I think that the NBA has shown that it is good to have these guys. The center position is super physical. We've said this a million times in this podcast. Like, the center position is super physical, and you really want to, at least for the meaningless games, i.e. the regular season, you would love to avoid getting your players like, so I'll use this as an example. We know that lineups with KD at the 5, when they went shooting, like those lineups were awesome, like offensively, right? You can't do that forever because you have to have Kevin Durant guard the 5, and that's a disaster for him because it's just going to take too much of a toll. Andre Drummond fills a pretty good need, fills a pretty needed role here in that I wouldn't mind at veteran minimum, like $2.5 million or whatever he was on. He was on 2.4 last year, coming in and playing like 60 games at 22 minutes each or something and just rebounding every single ball and guarding the other guy's big guy if he need it and taking a bunch of Joel Embiid lumps and knowing he's like, yeah, is he going to get roasted in like some drop coverage defense a lot? Yeah, of course. But who cares? Like when you're playing the Oklahoma City Thunder,
on, game 32 or you're playing like whatever, Andre Drummond is a really nice player to have. And I can make a pretty strong case just from that standpoint to bring him back. Is he a championship level player? No. I mean, he gets to play the vet minimum. So what do you expect? Right. So I think from this case, in some ways I can make like a stronger case for Drummond than I can for Claxton because, and I know that's going to sound weird, but like at least with Drummond, I know exactly what I'm getting. Like I'm going to get this many rebounds, this kind of interior presence. I know the physicality will be there. There will be some games you think he should earn a lot more. There'll be some games you think he should earn nothing. And I just know what it's going to be. And so maybe I'm overstating the Claxton thing. Like, but does that make sense?
I know what you mean from the standpoint of like you want to have just reliability, not in terms of how good the player is. Just you want to know what you're getting out of them. I think you're already starting to say it.
He's not going to sign for $10 million somewhere, right? Like,
well, okay. And this is my thing. If he's signing for the vet minimum, you're bringing back, great, fine. Like I'll tell you right now, bring him back, great, right? That's fine. If the number starts to move up out of that range, then I start to have reservations. Just simply around the idea of it. I think it's to your point. Like I get the idea you need someone that's going to eat some innings for you, that's going to be able to do some stuff for you during the regular season that you're not going to use as much in the postseason. However, I also think the Nets need to start to gravitate away from using a lot of bodies that are going to be meaningless later on because you do want to develop some level of consistency around it. And you were starting to hint to it. I think Nic Claxton, though, well, first of all, and I know you agree with this. It's understood. He obviously has more upside, but I also think like, what his floor is right now. Now, is that good enough, to use more often and to put out there more frequently in more matchups than Drummond? The physicality piece of it, maybe not, but we know that he can defend every position on the court. We know that he has the ability to get out and run the floor. We know that he's starting to develop some of the passing. Like, okay, we know that Drummond can get rebounds for you, and we know that he can run, and he's good in the pick and roll. Okay, but I would say I still think there's more consistency in Nic Claxton's game just from the few things that he does do, right? Like, and to that standpoint, it comes down to dollars. If it's anything more than the vet minimum, I just think you can find a body, and I'll tie it into the last guy we talk about here in a minute in Day'Ron Sharpe, but you can find a big body just to bang around for a while. I don't think that Drummond does anything uniquely that you couldn't replace with another veteran minimum.
Okay, so I'm gonna walk back one. I'm gonna take back a little what I said here. I'd rather have Claxton. If the money's all the same, and I'd rather have both. I
know you were, yeah.
I misspoke there. I was more saying I was more trying to say I understand what Andre Drummond is, and I think that player is fine. And I was number one on the list that wanted him out of the playoff rotation. So like everyone go back and listen. We were freaking out that he was still in the playoff rotation at the end. And this is the same person that's saying, and I understand the utility that he has for X amount of minutes. And you're referencing Day'Ron Sharpe, like who we're going to talk about. And at some point you just have too many of these guys, and I get it. I'm just saying that like at a certain low number, if there was no market for him, I'd be totally fine bringing him back. Like,
I also don't think this will be this would not be the case with him, although we know the playoff potential issues. But I also don't want to commit any amount of money to a player that maybe all of a sudden just isn't playing during the regular season, right? And that happened with a lot of guys the Nets brought back this past year.
Yes.
Like all of a sudden, hey, listen, I don't care if it's $4. If you're spending $4 and the player's never seeing a minute on the court, then you have wasted the value. And I don't know where else you could spend it.
Hold on. You're not, and I don't think that's a risk with Drummond. I don't think
no, it's not.
Okay,
yeah, that's But that's the thing you want to safeguard against when you make these choices. So you can make the smart choice knowing that he's going to have a consistent role all year long, as opposed to maybe a poor choice when we look back to last offseason and saying, oh, it's so logical to do X, Y, and Z. Well, now 60 games later, we just see these guys are DNPs for the remainder of the year.
Right. And we saw this with Blake, and we saw this with Aldridge, right? Like sometimes these guys can fall off a cliff and they can get old. I say this about Drummond. Drummond's 28 years old. Like I was going
to say he looks old, but he
looks old, and you think of him as old. I would definitely have guessed I knew this already, but I would definitely have guessed a number way older because I feel like he's been in the league for a long time. But he has. Like he came in young and he started basically right away. And he's just been around for a long time. So, but he's only 28 and he doesn't have a ton of playoff miles on him. So like the miles aren't there in the way that some of the miles were for some of these other guys. Like Blake has tons of playoff miles on him. Aldridge had tons of playoff miles on him too. Like Drummond doesn't have any of that. Now, some of that's because he's not as good as those guys. So like whatever, but he's not some like old fogey that you think that is just going to fall off a cliff here in a year or two. I don't think so. And I think that's a good point. And we'll get to Day'Ron here in the last second, but I think that's a good point around the mistakes the Nets made and guys they signed last year, like the amount of money, even at the minimums, that just got churned off because of we overrated who they were.
Yep.
We had no space for them. I mean, it was kind of a total mess. The Millsap, they started the season with DeAndre. Or DeAndre left before the season.
No, Bembry though.
Bembry, Carter, James Johnson. I mean, like there was a lot of guys that came in and were not on the team at the end of the year because they just kind of stunk or whatever. Or you had to cut them for other reasons. So anyway, I don't think that's a risk with Drummond here.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay, we're gonna get to everyone's favorite center in waiting. We'll see, Day'Ron Sharpe. First, gonna talk to you about our friends over at Bet Online. Our partners at Bet Online continue to be the number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. Bet Online's got everything for you. The latest odds, they got scores. They're gonna roll you through the basketball playoffs. They have futures. If you want to get on the NFL action over there, all your sports wagering information is found right there on Bet Online. Maybe you want to do some live betting as well. You head on over to betonline.net. Today, you use your mobile device. You learn about all the trends and action. Bet Online, where the game starts.
All right. So where we will start to, of course, wrap this up then is with Day'Ron Sharpe. And I'm being tongue in cheek if you're watching on YouTube. Day'Ron Sharpe is good. Here's, I think, the problem. And a lot of fans, like, listen, everyone knows I love me a rookie. And I was big on Kessler Edwards. We're going to talk about him in our rookie episode coming up later in the week. I think that the big issue for what I think speaks to how you feel about Day'Ron Sharpe is that he got overexposed too early. I think that he would have been better suited to just be living down in the G League for the entire season, working on his game. I talked with Candace Cooper, who covers Locked On ACC for the Locked On Network. And she talked about him when I said, hey, they come as a prospect. We think he has some perimeter shot to his game. She said, yeah, it could be there, but I wouldn't anticipate that anywhere early in his career. Everything about his game is good, but raw and needs time to develop. So when you look and you see the sample size at the NBA level and he's picking up tons of fouls and it looks kind of like, hey, is he going to be able to adjust to the pace of the play, et cetera? I think that's a little bit of him being overexposed. I tend to look at him, and I think he has, again, maybe a little more upside in the grand scheme of things, but I look at him the same way that I look at an Andre Drummond, from a get in there, you're going to be a body, you're going to battle, you're going to grab rebounds. You saw him get a little bit better in the screen game. His passing started to come on in some of the small sample sizes we saw over the course of the season. So I think that there's things there that he can evolve and develop. The question becomes, can you commit X amount of time over the course of the year to that progress for him? And I know you don't feel necessarily the same.
Well, I just not that I don't feel the same. It's just that I just understand, and sometimes I end up underrating guys because of this. So it can work both ways here. But sometimes I do think that folks fall in love too much with the thing that's not there because they're not watching it be bad in front of their eyes. Like I think like that happens to NBA fans all the time. You out there probably felt this, right? It's like you want to see the other guy because the guy that you're watching now isn't up to snuff. So therefore, it's easy for like your cognitively to go to, well, this guy's not good enough. There must be someone better. So insert player X to come in and do something better. The problem is like, and sometimes maybe it's hard to trust the Nets because there's been weird decisions that guys have ended up being really good that weren't in the rotation early. Like Bruce Brown, who's like, doesn't start the season, closing playoff games, right? Okay, I get like the Nets don't have an amazing track record sometimes with this. I think that Day'Ron has the tools and the size and the athleticism to be something. I just don't think you can walk in day one of next season and be like, he's the backup center. I just don't, I don't think I saw enough from that. There was flashes where the rebounding per minute was amazing. Like he had some great athleticism. You know, the offensive boards, I think he had like one of the best offensive board rates in the entire NBA per minute. My database is down right now and the credentials aren't coming up. So I try to get it right here, but the credentials are locked into my one pass, which is logged out. So I can't do it while we're doing
but trust him. He did.
Point being, I had looked at this like late in the season and his per minute rebounding and his per minute offensive rebounding was like the best in the league at one point. And, you know, the sample size was super small, but it still met what your eyes were going to say. It was like, this guy can get after it. He's got a good nose for the ball. Like he's really good at this thing. He was also among the worst per minute foul guys in the entire league. Now that's correctable. with time and, getting used to the speed and all that other stuff and scheme. And Nets didn't do anyone favors with like getting people used to anything last year. So this whole season was like that. I can see it. There's a world 2 years. I don't think he's gonna be Jared Allen. Like, I don't think he's gonna be Claxton. I don't think he's gonna be these guys. I don't think he has that kind of upside. Like, could he be a poor man's version of Andre Drummond? Like, maybe. I don't know. I guess I can see it, and I will always just pump the brakes on this, because if he is your backup true center going into next season, I don't see.
And I think this falls into that category of, because now if we're talking about all three of these players, we want Claxton back, and we think it's going to work out in favor for Brooklyn with everything that's gone on with him. We think that Drummond, probably vet minimum, all good. Like, we'll bring him back and we like it. Day'Ron Sharpe's going to be on this team. This isn't about returning. It's just about what is his outlook. If you tell me now some of the problem here is, and maybe why when you talk about Drummond and then you think about Day'Ron Sharpe, this is where I go, well, because you can only have so many bodies that don't do certain things for you. And if you put Claxton and Drummond and Sharpe and add Ben Simmons into the mix of, right, well, here's some guys that aren't doing a ton of shooting.
And Bruce Brown, and add Bruce Brown. Like, I mean, how many non-shooters can we live with here? Like, you can't. At some point, there's a breaking point.
And so that's what becomes an interesting factor. And that's where I look at it as, I probably am in that camp. It's like, I'd rather see what Day'Ron Sharpe can develop into rather than the status quo of Andre Drummond. It doesn't mean that it's one or the other. They can both be brought back. And over the course of the year, you can start to say, well, we see why. By the way, Drummond showed that he could be a foul machine. So maybe you just have a young and an old version of the same kind of product, where one guy obviously can maybe give you a little bit more as it progresses along. The outside shooting, something that we once upon a time, we thought, and it was reported as a prospect, that Claxton was going to be able to bring that into his game. If Day'Ron Sharpe comes into next year and you see a little bit of development from the shot selection, then all of a sudden I think you can start to evolve how he gets utilized in this offense. I think that's possible, but I can't put it in the camp of anything other than it's a possibility, not a probability. So it'll be interesting.
The Nets just don't ever do this. Like, they never do this.
Well, that's probably the big problem, is the organizational, right? They don't develop these guys in that way.
Or they just don't see it as a scheme that they want to play, right? Like, I think that's more of what it is. It's like,
well, it wouldn't hurt to get away from
that for whatever reason. I don't know if it's whatever the chicken or the egg here is. I will say this, and we'll close out on these two other guys, and then we'll kind of get into the next podcast. We're going to talk more about rookies, and we're going to talk about do some grades on some of these other rookies, non-Sharpe categories, the guys that played a little bit more. But if the money, let me think. We roll through all these guys that can't really play together, and you just can't. At some point, you have too many guys that can't shoot. So whatever. If Drummond didn't left and you were signing guys on vet minimums because you were taking stabs, and you could get guys like, I'm just throwing these random names out, like, and we'll talk about some of these dudes like Joe Ingles or Daniel House. I don't think he doesn't qualify, but like, where they just have a different skill set and they're cheap and you can like dream on some other different version of them, then that is money better well spent than Drummond, because you have too many redundant assets. So
yes,
this isn't all binary. It's not like take them or leave them. It's like, no, if you can't get someone else, then bring them back. But if the vet minimum stuff is better spent on a different archetype of player, not LaMarcus Aldridge and not Blake Griffin, like, that's not the player I'm talking about. Like, another wing connector kind of guy, then yes, you need to do that instead. And then you deal with the Day'Ron Sharpe lumps. Like, I think that's right.
So, by the way, because LaMarcus Aldridge isn't being brought back, Blake Griffin's not coming back. We can just clear.
Well, are you sure about that? I don't know. I'm not sold on like them definitely not coming back. I don't think they should.
Well, then we got other wilder. But well, you know what? Okay, let's put a pin in that one, because God, I'll have some thoughts around that. But what I did like, I don't think
it's a certainty that those guys are not on the team. I mean, I think there's like a world where Blake is back here.
Okay, you know what? I'll split them up. Blake can be back. I think that there was a weird scenario played out there. I don't see LaMarcus Aldridge being back and a part of this team. I just think that you're running yourself into the same problem again about what can you depend on, and now matchups, and you can't have 5 guys on your roster that you go, not in this series, not for this matchup, not against this opponent. And just to your point about these things, we're talking specifically about one position, but you can, I like how you framed it. You can live with Day'Ron Sharpe taking some lumps over the course of the season if you spent the vet minimum on another shooter, on someone more defensively and wing-minded for this roster to get better overall. So everything has to happen in conjunction. Nothing can be taken, unto itself. Is Drummond worth it? Well, that's a bit of a vacuum statement to try to assess. So we'll see how the offseason plays out. But at the very least, the Nets have possibility. Again, I will say for everybody, right? Yeah, all these guys we just talked about today, possibilities, but what are the probabilities of what these guys give you next year?
Yeah, this can be interesting. Each one of these could also domino affect other decisions too. These aren't going to all happen in a vacuum. All right, we're going to be back tomorrow. Obviously, we're going to talk grading out some of these rookie performances from this year's interesting class of rookies that the Nets really probably need to continue developing to have sort of hope down the line in terms of player development. So we're going to break those guys down starting tomorrow. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe over on YouTube. We're climbing toward 3,000 subscribers. So make sure you like and subscribe over on YouTube. Leave a comment. Really nice comments today, too. Really appreciate it. Try to jump in and respond to some of those as well. Leave a comment and make sure you like and subscribe over on YouTube.
We need some bodies. We need some big boys. Am I right, friends? And that's why you say, go away or I'll call the Brute Squad. I'm on the Brute Squad. You are the Brute Squad. Miracle Max.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We will be back again tomorrow talking
Pride.
more Brooklyn Nets basketball.